Thank you, Chuck. In fact, I want to thank the praise team and the leadership of this congregation. When you stop and think about the remarkable accomplishment that happened when all of a sudden everything was turned off like a light switch, and we had to move outside and online in a matter of days. I know there's been some glitches and hiccups in being online, but all in all, it's been a remarkable transformation of our services. I know it's something like an airplane that's already taken flight and we're still working on it, but it's been a wonderful, and I think they deserve some credit as to what's been going on here. So today, my message is entitled Cancel Culture. You may have heard that term in the news lately, and I'm going to put a little different spin on the term, but that's what it's about. So let me start by asking you a question. How's 2020 going for you? Yeah. It's certainly going to be memorable, isn't it? All the things that have been going on. I know years from now we're going to sit back and say, you remember back in 2020, that year when we had the terrible virus and all the fear and the anxiety and some tragedies? And then there was the demonstrations and the remodeling efforts in downtown Seattle, the violence elsewhere. Oh, we can't forget about the murder hornets. It's been an eventful year. But you know, the imposed shelter-in-home order where we were to remain at home, I happen to have an extended version of that because, as some of you know, my wife had surgery, major surgery, and I've been caring for her for almost, 5 weeks nearly. Yeah, 5 weeks and going. She's doing well, thank you. But it required 24/7 care, and I didn't go anywhere very often. Instacart was our lifeline. And I have to tell you that just the act of taking communion with you today is a blessing. Just to be here and see you face to face is a blessing. Because when you're sheltering at home and you're quarantined, you have a lot of time to reflect. So I've been reflecting on the things that I've been seeing and hearing about the way things are going. And I think it's safe to say that with the virus going around, the political unrest, the elections coming up, all the demonstrations and all the destruction, it's safe to say that we are in the midst of a culture war. There are groups of people who want to radically transform our culture. They're dissatisfied with our way of life. And I see that a lot on the news. It is a steady diet of it. And so you've heard of the term cancel culture, in which there are certain groups of people that are tearing down our history as if somehow that would change what happened in the past, or that somehow rectifies the wrongdoings. And we call that effort the cancel culture, because they're trying to cancel out things that they don't like about our culture. Well, today, as I said, I'm going to talk about canceling some things, but they're from a different point of view. You know, when I was a young teenager, I remember in 1969, in July, about this time of year, watching Neil Armstrong descend that ladder in the Apollo mission on the moon. And he took that last step and he stated those famous words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." And we were living at that time in the late 60s or early 70s, we were living in a time of a overarching sense of dread that we could be annihilated anytime by nuclear missiles. The Soviet Union had thousands of missiles pointed at us, and we had thousands of missiles pointed at them. We have enough nuclear bombs to destroy the Earth several times over. And there were people demonstrating in the streets. They were demonstrating, we want to live. We want our generation, we want our children to live. We want to denuclearize the world. We were arguing about survival. So there was demonstrations going on then. But there was also a wonderful sense of euphoria and optimism for that Apollo mission. And I remember thinking then, I remember this so clearly that, wow, I'm looking forward in the future and all the things that are going to happen. Because here we are, we've landed on the moon. What else is mankind going to be capable of doing? And so I thought about the year 2020. Because 2020 is a cool sounding year, 2020. And this is not what I envisioned back then. I envisioned that we would be flying in cars, we'd be taking our meals with a pill, and then we'd have, maybe teleportation. We would certainly have a colony on the moon and probably halfway to Mars, if not already there. Isn't that the feeling we had in the late 60s and early 70s? About the only thing that came true from that time is that we do have the Dick Tracy watch, right? That's about the only thing. So we had this great attitude that we were going in the right direction. And there was a huge tug of war between the Soviet Union and the United States. That was a cultural war. And there was a gentleman by the name of Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Alexander Ivanovich Solzhenitsyn. You may have heard of him. He's a novelist. He was a philosopher, a bit of a historian, and also a political prisoner of the Soviet Union's Gulag system. He was a dissident. And he was imprisoned because he spoke out against what he saw was wrong with Soviet communism. He wrote a book you may have heard of called The Gulag Archipelago in the 1960s and 1970s when he served in his forced labor camp. He smuggled the manuscripts that he's written piece by piece out, and it was assembled and published, and he was expelled from the Soviet Union in 1975. I'm shortening the story. In 1978, though, he gave the commencement address at Harvard. 1978, Harvard graduation commencement address. Very prestigious. And everyone thought that this man, who had suffered under the brutal system of being a political prisoner in the communist world, was now on the right team and saying the right things, and he was going to say how right we were. And he did for about 5 minutes. And then he started critiquing the Western culture. And he said 3 things that I think resonate with me during this quarantine. So I'm going to tie those 2 things together. 1978, Harvard commencement address by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, which I like saying, and the quarantine and what's going on in our culture today. The first thing he critiqued about America was that we have lost our spiritual underpinnings. He, as you know, he was part of a Soviet system, a communist system that took the virtue of equality. Everybody's equal under communism. And they took that virtue. We think that's a good thing here. We think equality is a great thing. But the communists raised that virtue to such a high pinnacle that nothing else mattered. And it turned it from a virtue into an evil. Because everything else was secondary. Equality at all costs, regardless of what other values or virtues there are. Everybody was equally poor, equally afraid, and it was a terrible system for anybody that disagreed with that. Let me read to you, I'm going to read to you 1 paragraph from his speech. That's the only time I'm going to read from him, and we'll go on from that. Here's what he had to say. Every citizen, this is talking about the United States, every citizen has been granted the desired freedom and material goods in such quantity and quality as to guarantee, in theory, the achievement of happiness. In the process, however, one psychological detail has been overlooked. The constant desire to have still more things and a still better life, and the struggle to attain them imprint many Western faces with worry and even depression. Active and tense competition fills all human thoughts without opening a way to free spiritual development. Many of you know that I have spent some time in Guatemala, and I've been there 6 or 7 times, and I go down and I stay with the same family. So over the years, I've become an adopted member of their family, and I've adopted my Guatemalan mom. I first cleared that with my mom, my birth mom, to make sure that she wouldn't be offended, because I have 2 moms, a Guatemalan mom and my mother, who lives in Colorado. I was always surprised when I returned back, the little bit of culture shock that I experienced coming back to the United States because of the affluence. But what struck me more is what he just said, is that even with all this material wealth, we're unhappy, we're anxious. You just have to read the statistics. Americans take more Xanax than anybody on the planet, I think. And what I was struck about the culture in Guatemala is how happy they were. In fact, it was so contagious, I became a different person there. I laughed until my ribs hurt. The stories that I told and the stories they told in that family setting would bring tears to your eyes every night. It was a wonderful experience. Sitting in a home that doesn't have hot running water. Sitting in a home where the electricity goes off parts of some days. Sitting in a home where there's a bare light bulb suspended from my concrete bedroom. Sitting where you have to wash your clothes with an old scrub board up on the top. They were the happiest people I've ever been around. And it certainly was because they had an overabundance of material things. So let me connect that now with my experience sitting at home, forced to sit there as a quarantine, surrounded by all of my possessions, all of the things of value that I have worked so hard to attain all these years. I found that they were empty, kind of like artificial sweetener. They had that sweet taste, and then they became bitter. I did not find a lot of joy in the things I possessed. They did not give me contentment. Unlike the Guatemalans, I'm afraid sometimes I have failed to develop the relationships and the joy that can bring. I have to tell you, I'm not even sure I know my neighbors anymore. And this quarantine has given me time to reflect upon that. That our culture has replaced the spiritual development with the pursuit of material things. Now, don't get me wrong. We need material things. There's a basic level of things that we need to have to be happy. I get that. But it's when, it's not the fact that you possess material things that's the same, but it's when the material things possess you. That's when it becomes a problem. When we spend more time worrying about what happens to our things than we do about other people, we have taken those things and we put them into the seat of our heart when we do that. So the first criticism that Alexander Solzhenitsyn had was that we have become overly materialistic. You, today, sitting here, have an advantage over the morning service because there is no clock out there. And there is a clock on that wall, so I hope to get done at the appropriate time. Not to say that I went over, I actually was fine, so don't get me wrong there either. The second thing that Alexander Solzhenitsyn complained about and noticed is that our justice system did not provide the type of justice that our culture is capable of producing. He noted that delivering justice oftentimes was related to the wealth that the person had, more so than the actual truth of the matter. When Jesus started his ministry here on this planet, he was invited to speak at a synagogue, and you probably recall that he walked in the synagogue and he opened up the scroll of Isaiah and he read these words. This is Luke 4:16 through 21. The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. I'm going to editorialize a little bit. To the poor, to the disenfranchised, to the marginalized, to those that we sweep under the rug. Those are the ones he came to preach the good news to. He continues. Isaiah continues when he says, he has sent me to proclaim release to captives and recovery of sight to the blind. Not just the physically blind, but the spiritually blind. To set free the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. This reading got him in trouble with the authorities because he was going to upset the apple cart. Because his message was for everybody, especially those that lived on the edge. I have had the fortune or misfortune, perhaps, of being involved with the justice system on 2 or 3 different occasions, civilly, and I was a witness in a criminal case. In fact, I was the victim of the criminal case. In all the 3 or 4 times I've been in a courtroom in a sworn capacity, under oath, I've come away from that experience knowing that the truth was never, ever revealed. The truth was never brought fully out. Because the justice system is more concerned about the law and the legal system than they are about the truth. This was the criticism that Alexander Solzhenitsyn, let me hear someone say that, by the way. Alexander Solzhenitsyn made. He said that the justice system does not provide justice for all fairly and equitably. I once had a defense attorney quip to me that Lady Justice wears a blindfold holding those scales because she doesn't want to see what goes on in the courtroom. And so people are demonstrating on the streets about our Justice Department. They're tearing things up. They're destroying property. They're advocating violence because of a bad police officer. And there are bad police officers. I've encountered them. I've encountered the tyrants behind the badge, the ones that exceed their legal authority, the ones that are brutal. I have experienced those. I've known them. They should not be protected. They should not be wearing that uniform unless they can mend their ways. And that's it, isn't it? Judicial reform is not about ending the system as much as it is mending it. I don't think we should defund the police as what's going on in the movement right now, but we should reform it. I think there's some things that Alexander Solzhenitsyn had right. Micah, the Old Testament prophet, had this to say. He has shown you, God, has shown you, O mortal, that's you and me, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Proverbs 31, 8 and 9. Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy. I recall a time when I was working in a nonprofit organization that served youth in this county. And one of the first amazing discoveries I found after I moved here was that Tulare County has one of the highest percentages of children living in poverty in the entire United States. In fact, it's called Little Appalachia in terms of children living in poverty. But I didn't see it. I don't see it here. I don't see it out there. I don't see it in Visalia. Everywhere I went, I never saw that kind of poverty that these numbers on this piece of paper were telling me existed. So one day, I decided to go out and do some investigative journalism, go out into the rural areas of the county. So I took my black and white FJ Cruiser, which looks a little bit like a police vehicle. I took my 6-pound fur of white dog and my camera and telephoto lens, and we took a journey out to places that I had heard about but never been to. My first stop was the Garden Center of London. And as I emerged from the orange groves into this, you know, when I lived in Africa, we called those shanty towns. When I emerged into this row of homes, I had a preconceived notion of what I would see. I thought I would see field workers or nothing, because it was in the daytime. I thought they'd be out, you know, working in the fields. That's what I thought I'd see. And as I drove by, in 4 or 5 homes, I saw the same thing. I saw 2 or 3 young Caucasian men dressed in black, black t-shirts, black pants, and no hair. And they were all in this one block, 4 or 5 of them. And I was so stunned and so surprised that I stopped about a block away and I turned around. And I pulled up where I could see the whole block of them. I thought, wow, this would make a great photograph. So I rolled down my window and I take my camera, and as I'm focusing on the nearest person to me, I happened to focus on the door behind him, and there was a man standing with a shotgun in the doorway. I did have a telephoto lens on. I'm not completely stupid. But I knew it was time to leave. Those guys were skinheads. And so as I made my way through that community and through Yedem and all the little towns, Tonyville, Tullyville, Woodville, and all the wonderful spots, I became aware of the people in our own county that have become marginalized. Seville's water is so bad they have to truck in water sometimes. We go to Guatemala to fix their water, and we have a community in this town or this county that needs the same kind of treatment. So those demonstrators have a point, but I strongly disagree with their Machiavellian, the end justifies the means approach, that they elevate that value or that virtue to the point where it has now become an evil. So I'll summarize in a little bit. The third point and final point is that when I was that young boy watching that Apollo mission, I was and still am a voracious reader. I read everything. I read the cereal box Mom put on the table. I read the shampoo bottles, tried to pronounce those ingredients. I read everything. Books, periodicals, magazines, newspapers, whatever I could consume. My dad had a big library, and I read a lot of stuff. And I remember so clearly one day sitting at the kitchen table, and I was reading a newspaper article, and I was reading it out loud to my mom because she was cooking. And I finally turned to her and said, this is incredible. We need to do something about this. This is absolutely terrible. It was some bad story. I don't remember what it was. And she turned to me and said, Joe, don't believe everything you read. And I didn't understand what that meant. What do you mean, don't believe it? Why would it be in print if it wasn't true? So Alexander Solzhenitsyn's third critique was of our press, journalism. And I have friends that are in the business still, from my days in working with CNN and the other cable networks back in the day. So I may go from preaching to meddling here, but the press has, in Solzhenitsyn's critique, is totally unaccountable. Who's the watchdog of the watchdog. The other network? No. The only people that the press is accountable to is the bottom line. Make no mistake that the press reports news as a commodity, and you consume it as a commodity, and you pay for what you consume. No other country in the world, by the way, calls their citizens consumers, except this one. So let me elaborate on what I mean by the commodity. Every newspaper, radio station, news station, every television has one objective, and that's to increase their Arbitron or Nielsen ratings. Because if they can raise that share of viewership, they can increase the rates of their advertisement. And so they craft a message, and they craft something that we will consume. So what's wrong with that? Well, Timothy, in the second book of Timothy, Paul writes this: "For the time will come when men will not tolerate sound doctrine, but with itching ears they will gather around themselves teachers to suit their own desires." We become so insulated, and we live in a world that is so insular that we are blind to the needs of others. Just like those children that I became aware of, and I spent the next decade of my life trying to work ways to improve their opportunities. And so we tend to filter out all the material that goes against our belief system. And so what I would ask you to do in closing here, and you know, when someone up here preaching says in closing, that means absolutely nothing. There's a couple of things I want you to consider. One is to remember that we are not of this world. We are sojourners and travelers, and that our culture is not the end. It's not the end all. There awaits for us a heavenly home, like Chuck was talking about. So I want you to consider canceling parts of your culture. If you don't agree with parts of the culture, don't participate. Engage in intellectual honesty. Intellectual honesty, which is one's personal beliefs. That's where you take your personal beliefs or your politics and let them interfere with your pursuit of truth. Is that you do not let them interfere with the pursuit of truth. You know, there's nothing more embarrassing for me is when if I ever become politically active on social media and I repost or post a meme that says exactly what I wanted to say and is exactly my point, dead spot on, and I put it out there and I find out it's completely false. That the attribution is wrong. So-and-so never said that. It would have been great if they had of, but they didn't. I wasn't being intellectually honest. I didn't do the rigorous evaluation, the Berean thing to do. Because it conformed to my worldview and my political view, I shot it out. Don't do that. And remember that if you have the time and the energy to do the research, that is much more valuable than just repeating what you've been told. Open your hearts and your minds to finding ways to solve these issues. So how do we deal with materialism? Give it away. Give it away. If something has possessed you, exercise it by giving it away. Realize that material things are tools to accomplish the purpose for which God has put you on this planet. If you have a beautiful home, use it to the glory of God. If you have a great car, transport people for the glory of God. If you have wealth, share it for the glory of God. If you see an injustice, speak out. Speak out about that injustice. Speak out about the rights of those who do not have an advocate or can't afford one. And realize that the press, in fact, I think I would be ready to sign a petition that would require all manufacturers of television sets to put a warning label. We love these warning labels. Put a warning label on the TV. And it'd be real simple. For entertainment purposes only. Especially the news. And remember that the news that you're being fed is biased. We have a much higher calling than to be driven by the anxiety-producing and the fear-mongering that goes on. You know, the old adage, if it bleeds, it leads. If the house is burning, that's what you report. There's so much good going on, and there's so many positive things going on, that you need to filter out that stuff that's coming in the pipe. So, wow, look at that. Right on time. So by closing, I want to explain one last concept. There's a culture war. We have one side over here that wants to radically transform us immediately. The entire homogeneous United States in lockstep with what they believe. I favor changing from within, individual by individual. Let me be the spark. Let me be the light for somebody else. Let me get out there and let me say and talk about the relationships that we have, especially the relationship with Jesus. Because without that, nothing else matters. Nothing else matters.